Good morning. Right there in the back, thank you so much. I'm getting away from the guys in the back. And thank you to the 3 people who decided to sit up here at the front. So I'm a prowler, so you at the back shouldn't feel too comfortable. Okay, I will get to you in time. Anybody who wants a seat, you could come and show your appreciation right down here at the front. I'm extremely warm and welcoming. No, they're like, no, I'm staying up here. So my name is Louise Beaumont. I work with legislators and regulators to create disruption. I work with corporates to help them cope with that disruption. And I invest in and take board and advisory positions with the startups I think are going to exploit disruption, all based around my thinking around open data and the open future it's going to unleash. And that is, coincidentally, the future that we're here to discuss today. So broadly, these are the things I do. I chair things, I advise, and I invest. These are the different roles. Broadly, the top role, the top row there, is all the stuff around creating disruption. I co-chair Tech UK's Open Banking and Payments Working Group, which is what was referenced earlier. Second row is advisory roles, so bottom line's a corporate, Yapily is a startup, and then the bottom row is the organizations I've put my money in. So I don't just have opinions, I put my money into the things which I think are going to make a difference. And I'll explain everything in this discussion here. Open banking to the far horizon. Because if anybody thinks this is confined to open banking and it's an API thing, I'm about to profoundly disabuse you of that notion. So we're going to be discussing 4 things. We're going to be looking at what's driving our open future. And it's not just regulation. What does this mean for people, small businesses, and ultimately the corporates that serve them? Who are the runners and riders in the race? And what are the core characteristics of the companies that will succeed? That's what we're going to be covering today. And we're starting here. Now, this multicolored swirl is to describe to you the 4 drivers which are shaping our open future, and to describe how intermingled they are, because they can't really be pulled apart. The first one I'm going to describe to you is the most powerful, and it's the fact that our open future is driven by people's attitudes, behaviors, and expectations. And that's people as individual consumers, and it's people as small businesses. It's humans. Humans' attitudes, behaviors, and expectations are ever more demanding. Why? Because we have been trained that way over the last 10, 15 plus years to expect, this is revelatory, stuff that works. Right? Mostly, we have been trained by those huge technology-rich organizations which have driven our expectations and have set us to expect services which work. So that's the first driver. Attitudes, behaviors, and expectations. Ours are ever more demanding. Secondly, the second driver is the technology that enables that. The technology that knows where you are, the technology that you talk to and that talks back to you, the technology that can analyze your interests and your behaviors and shape the services which drive ultimately your expectations. Thirdly, of course, it's the competitors that are coming into this space. Broadly, if we define this as banking, it's not a shock, but banking is not just banking anymore. Banking hasn't been banking for quite some time. Financial services is a far, far broader piece, and all of the things that we buy which are enabled by the organizations that understand who we are and what we want are driving these changes. So the competition, which we'll come to in more depth in a moment, broadly, of course, the incumbents. Of course, there's the fintech providers, and we'll debate whether that's a real threat in a moment. There's the old economy data players in technology, in telco and energy, anybody who's got a huge amount of data that they could use but have currently been ignoring. And of course, it's those technology titans. So in this half of the world, we tend to think of it as GAFA. In other parts of the world, they have a broader definition, and the acronym there is FATBAG. I know, it stays with you, that one. So obviously, Facebook, Amazon, Tencent, Baidu, and Google. Apple, interestingly enough, is making a business play out of being dead last in data. We will always protect your data. Yeah, they're dead last. So that's what I'm trying to bring to your mind by this, painfully colorful swirl here. All of these things wrapped together. And it's not just the last one, regulation, which is driving this change. Regulation to open data. In the UK, it's called open banking. In other parts of the world, they call it something different. But what it means is literally the ownership of the data is with the person who generates it. That person can share their data in order to get services that work for them. So this is interesting. We've got these 4 drivers of change. And what the incumbent banks had done was ignore the first 3, attitudes, behaviors, expectation, the technology that allows you to create ever higher expectations, and the competition. And they paid attention to the regulation. And their way of paying attention is the anaphylactic shock compliance reaction. Right? Letter of the law, argue the hell out of it, slow it down, make it only about APIs. APIs are not the messiah. Right? This is not just about APIs. 4 drivers of change here. So secondly, we've moved on. We've now got a daisy. Because I realize sometimes I give this, I have this conversation with an audience, and I don't have slides. I just talk to them. And I say something like, imagine a daisy. And you can see people panic. They're like, oh my God, how do I do that? What the hell is a daisy? So I've sometimes realized that actually it's easier to put one up on the screen. So imagine you as a daisy. Imagine you are a daisy. You're the little yellow bit in the middle. And each and every petal is a petal of data that you can choose to share in order to be able to get access to the services that you want. So really simple example, we've all used it. If you are prepared to share your location petal of data, Uber comes and gets you. In the open banking sense, we've got a number of petals of data. We've got our personal current account or our business current account. There's also our savings accounts, our credit cards. In time, in the UK, if our pension system gets itself sorted out, we might have access to our pensions dashboard. You could imagine other petals of data coming in our open future. Our health data, our telco data, energy data. Interestingly, in Australia, they've chosen to disrupt not just the banking incumbents, but the telco and energy incumbents as well. So imagine all of the petals of data that you might be able to share in our open future. My belief is that you will be able to share those petals of data in your open future. At the moment, it doesn't look terribly interesting because we've just got kind of money aggregation services. And nobody looks at those and thinks, wow. Actually, they're the kind of foundation garments of change. Because if you aggregate lots of different petals of data, you end up in an open future where hyper-personalized, predictive and preemptive services cluster around you. They cluster around you as an individual or you as a business, but you are the focus. And this turns on its head all of those corporate exercises to have one view of the customer. Because most of those corporates will only be one petal on that data daisy. So this calls into question lots of things for our open future: digital identity, security, and what it means to continually keep a flow of data open. Because if I get a service that works for me, if I get a service I enjoy, if I get a service which is pleasurable, I'll leave that stream of data open. If the service doesn't work, I can turn that stream of data off. But if it works, that connection stays open. So think about what that means for the services that you'll need to provide in this open future. Hyper-personalized, predictive and preemptive, based around driving loyalty to the customer. Because what we're talking about here is finally being able to look down the right end of the trust telescope. Normally, organizations will talk about customer loyalty, as in, I'm the corporate, you, the customer, are loyal to me, and I'll give you a little card to stamp to prove it. Actually, loyalty in the future is about those corporates, those businesses, being able to prove their loyalty to their customers through keeping that line of data coming, providing a service which is enjoyable and pleasurable such that the heart of that data daisy, that's you, choose to keep that stream of data open. That's our data daisy. So now my third peculiar image of the morning. What I want to talk about here is the competition in play in a bit more detail. And what I'm trying to illustrate here is a multi-predator environment. And I wanted to talk about those different competitors in play, because I think it's quite interesting. Fintechs, believe me, I've invested in some, so I do know. I ran one, sold it to my institutional investor, worked on my institutional investor's exec team, looking at how to grow fintechs across 3 continents. So, big believer in fintechs. However, most fintechs are point solutions for today's problems. What the disruptors do is remove the problem. You don't need now an elastoplast over the problem. You've excised the problem. You've dealt with it differently. So that's interesting. So there we've got fintechs. Second set of competitors, I would argue, is anybody who's got a treasure trove of data that doesn't currently look at it. So there are huge organizations out there with enormous truckloads of data which they fail to look at. They hide it, they hoard it, and they never ever look at it. So that's energy companies, telco companies, and banks. And that slowly that attitude's starting to change. We've obviously got the tech titans, and they've got many, many profound strengths. It's not just the customer numbers, it's not just the customer relationship, it's not just the attitude to service, it's not the API first mentality. It's fundamentally the characteristics of success that they have go far, far beyond that. And I did a study to compare and contrast a large global bank board and executive with Amazon. And I looked across 10 measures of diversity to understand what the difference was. Now, across 6 measures of diversity, no difference. The bank had slightly more lady garnish, but it's okay, they didn't mean it. Uncomfortable laughter from the men at the front there. There were three really clear differences between the two organizations: education, experience, and inferred attitude to risk. Education, the bank's board and executive, 100% banking, finance, accounting, and law, 100%. Where had they worked? Well, 45% of the board had worked at JP Morgan or KPMG, and I think 42% of the executive had only ever worked for that one bank. Inferred attitude to risk, all company men, no entrepreneurs at all. Amazon, you know what I'm going to say. Widely diverse education. Arts as well as sciences. Where had they worked? Well, lots of different sectors, as well as on the entrepreneurial side and on the investing side. Inferred attitude to risk, well, they would be inventing the future that we're living in. I'd also say a really critical difference, which doesn't get flagged enough, behind these tech titans, whether you want to talk about GAFA or whether you want to talk about Fatbag, is, of course, their shareholder base. The shareholder base of big banks have a certain set of expectations, and it's around the share price and the dividend. The expectations of the shareholders behind those tech titans is market domination. So there are lots of things that I could call out to you about characteristics of success, but I think those are pretty fundamental. And of course, all of the stuff about technology first, and so on. So a multi-predator environment. It's not old school, just banking. It's not just a few apex predators competing against each other on the strength or otherwise of their current account. It's a very different world. And it has been a very different world for a long time. Interestingly, a year or so ago, when I was having this conversation with a large high street bank, they were hanging on my every word, much as you are today, sir. They were saying to me, this is so fascinating, but when is it going to happen? And I said to them, I'm telling you history. This is not sci-fi. And it was interesting, at that point, they completely lost interest. It was like game over. It was most bizarre. It was a really surreal environment. So we've had the multicolored swirl. We've had the data daisy. We've had the multi-predator environment. So now what I want to talk to you about is the core characteristics of companies which will succeed in this open future. And I've presupposed that you have engraved upon your spleen all of the stuff that I talked about in our multi-predator environment. So these are additional characteristics. Right at the top, we have brand. And the particular characteristic I want you to think about here is brand elasticity, stretchiness of the brand. So if you think about Amazon, put the word Amazon in front of pretty much anything, and you've got an Amazon service. Amazon Pay, Amazon Prime, Amazon Marketplace, Amazon Lending, Amazon Fashion. Try that with Barclays. Although, and I don't want to make anyone feel uncomfortable, some of you are wearing Barclays Fashion this morning. Brand elasticity. It's a really serious point. Can your brand stretch to accommodate new services delivered to new people in new ways? And can it do it at pace? Pace and scale. Next one down, talking and listening. It sounds really obvious, but what I'm talking about here is the ability to be able to deliver those hyper-personalized, predictive and preemptive services because you have a one-to-one connection at scale with all of your customers and all of your targeted customers, all of the people that you want to be enjoying your personalized service. All of those people to whom you can, as the corporate, demonstrate your loyalty. And the ability to talk and listen at scale, one-to-one, is really all about data. It's about openness of data, and it's about keeping that stream of data open such that you can continue to listen and that you can continue to talk to that individual. Obviously, you can make this point in a slightly shallow way by talking about the Echo technology, the Amazon Alexa. Other voice assistants are available. It's a really profound point about the ability to get an individual to share data with you and to do it in a human-appropriate way. So talking and listening, one of the core characteristics of companies that are succeeding and will continue to succeed in our open future. Services. These are these hyper-personalized, predictive and preemptive services that cluster around that individual. And the question here is, how many of those petals of data can you either persuade that individual to share with you in order to enable your hyper-personalized, predictive and preemptive service? Or how many of those petals of data will you deliver directly? And have a just quiet moment to think about how many of Amazon's services you consume, how many of Google's services you consume, how many of Tencent's, WeChat's, and so on, services you consume. Because the more of them you consume, the more hyper-personalized, predictive and preemptive, the more effective and the more pleasurable that service is, the more likely you are to keep that line of communication, that data flow, live. Ecosystem, hugely important. This is about, as a company, how do you access the ecosystem out there? How do you access that innovation? How do you access the people and companies with ideas? Of course, APIs are a mechanism for this. They're the mechanism for data flow. So I don't want to disparage APIs. They're really, really important. But it takes a lot more. It takes a brand that says we're listening. It takes a way of speaking to be able to attract those innovators to come work with you. It takes the right legal framework, the right compliance framework. It takes the right procurement approach and process. It takes the right marketing approach, the right sales approach, that innovators go, actually, I do want to work with you because you will get my service out to your customers and we will make revenue, we will make profit. If you have, as a large corporate, a process which is much like entering the third circle of hell, it's not an ecosystem, it's a hostage situation. And I think it was Fidor Bank recently that cut free from one of its big investors because they'd basically held it hostage for a couple of years and done nothing with it. So those innovators out there are absolutely wise to this. They absolutely know what to look for in a partner. And I think that many of you are of an age where you will remember the first 3 Star Wars films that were shown, starting in 1977. And you will remember the character Jabba the Hutt. Okay? I'm judging my audience here. Some people are definitely remembering Jabba rather too fondly. There is a scene at which Jabba holds Princess Leia captive. Which one of those characters do you think I'm intending you to understand as the fintech? And which one of those characters do you think I'm playing as the incumbent bank? The Princess Leias out there, the innovators out there, absolutely understand now, having seen so many abuses, what to look for. So the way to think about it is the world's biggest, slowest moving companies are competing for the time and the attention of the world's fastest, most fleet of foot, most innovative companies. That is the change of play. The bottom layer, of course, is that data. And the way I would encourage you to think about it here is you've got to find that data, you've got to augment that data, you've got to keep a constant stream of live data coming to you. You've got to torture the data, of course. Data science is incredibly important. It is at least half of what you need to do. The other half, of course, is the data artistry. The psychologists who actually understand people, the ethnographers who understand culture, the semioticians who understand meaning, and the ethicists who understand what's okay. If you think data science is the answer, let me give you an example from a large retailer. This large retailer was given a nugget of insight by his data science team. His data science team told him, men who buy lipstick are more likely to buy fresh fish. Data science, people. Now, the way this story then got told was men who buy lipstick for their wives are more likely to buy fresh fish. And I'm like, you don't know who they're buying it for. And you certainly don't know it's their wives. So that is where you need the balance, data science with data artistry. And to convince you that I believe what I am saying is true, this is where I spend my time. Left-hand side, creating that disruption. Right-hand side, coping with disruption, exploiting disruption. This is where I put my money. This is where I put my time. Thank you.